The Houthis have been making headlines with their missile attacks on Israel. Sometimes they're targeted by Israel, other times by the US, but they haven't backed down, and they don't seem likely to anytime soon. However, the Houthis' primary conflict has been with Saudi Arabia. In July 2024, a peace agreement was signed between Saudi Arabia and the Yemeni Houthi forces. This marked a dramatic shift for Riyadh, which 9 years earlier had launched a military intervention in Yemen promising victory, only to find itself negotiating peace with the same Houthis it once branded as terrorists. That peace didn't last long. By early 2025, Saudi Arabia began ramping up its support for the ousted Yemeni government it had been backing all along. And Saudi Arabia seems to have acknowledged its military limitations and entered a new agreement with the US. Details about the number of American troops to be stationed along Saudi Arabia's southern borders remain unclear, but reports confirm the deployment of additional Patriot missile systems in the region. This video won't dive into the current conflict. Instead, we'll focus on the history that led to this point, tracing the Saudi-Houthi war from its beginnings to the peace agreement. We'll tackle questions like, how did Saudi Arabia, the Pentagon's most loyal customer, find its state-of-the-art multi-billion-dollar arsenal struggling against the Houthis' guerrilla tactics in Yemen's rugged mountains? And are the Houthis really just a guerrilla group? Well, the story is a long one. It stretches back to 2011 and the events of the Arab Spring. At the time, Riyadh prioritized preserving the status quo in Yemen, but after the ousting of Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh, Saudi Arabia threw its support behind Abdrabbuh Mansur Hadi. When the Houthis seized the Yemeni capital Sana'a in 2014, Saudi Arabia shifted to a more aggressive policy. In 2015, under the leadership of then Defense Minister Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia launched a direct military intervention backed by a broad international coalition. However, 8 years of military operations failed to break the Houthis' resistance or stop their missile attacks on Saudi territory. By late 2022, this military stalemate forced Riyadh into a strategic U-turn, initiating peace talks with the Houthis as part of a broader rapprochement with Iran. This complex history lays the foundation for understanding the present and the challenges ahead. This striking contradiction highlights one of the most expensive military failures in modern warfare: an army equipped with the world's most advanced radar systems, F-15 fighter jets, and Patriot missile defense systems, repeatedly suffered strategic setbacks against rudimentary handmade drones and guerrilla tactics. At the start of the war, the Houthis didn't even have the advanced drones or missiles they possess today. This serves as a powerful reminder that military strength cannot be measured by technological superiority alone. The human and motivational dimensions of war remain critical, often proving to be the decisive factors. One of the greatest weaknesses of the Saudi Arabian military is the prioritization of tribal and family ties over merit in its organization. The appointment of members of the royal family to senior command positions has not only hindered the development of professional military careers, but has also severely limited the operational effectiveness of the army. This system has led to a lack of motivation among lower-ranking soldiers and weakened their capacity to take initiative. This problem is typical of an institutional weakness common in non-democratic regimes. Appointments based on political loyalty and family ties have undermined the professionalization of the military, leading to an overly centralized and rigid hierarchical structure. This has put the Saudi military at a great disadvantage in conditions that require quick and flexible decision-making in the field. In addition, Saudi Arabia's highly affluent society is another important factor affecting military performance. It is clear that soldiers coming from a life of comfort find it difficult to adapt to combat in Yemen's harsh geography and endless conflict. The Houthis, on the other hand, have an existential motivation and see the war as a struggle to protect their territory and way of life. The difference in motivation between these two sides has played a decisive role in changing the balance on the ground in favor of the Houthis. The efforts of U.S. military advisors have had limited impact due to the depth of structural weaknesses in the Saudi military. These advisors have focused on teaching the army how to use modern weapons systems, often on short-term rotations. However, such technical training has been insufficient for the long-term reforms needed to address the Army's fundamental institutional deficiencies. The change programs needed for modernization could not be implemented due to Saudi Arabia's socio-political structure and hierarchical management style. On the technical front, it is clear that the Saudi military is struggling to build a domestic personnel base that can effectively use modern weapon systems. This is further complicated by the underdevelopment of a professional, non-commissioned officer class and the lack of technical training. The military's failure to train such specialized cadres has rendered even the most advanced defense systems ineffective in the field. In addition, the underdevelopment of the national defense industry has left Saudi Arabia dependent on foreign sources for the procurement and maintenance of weapon systems. This has been a factor that has weakened not only military operations, but also the national security strategy in the long run. One of the major reasons for the failure of the Saudi Arabian army in its military operations in Yemen is its lack of real field experience. With limited experience in large-scale conventional conflicts throughout its history, the Saudi army has struggled to show flexibility in asymmetric warfare conditions. The guerrilla tactics encountered in Yemen rendered the army strategically unprepared. In addition, the military intelligence organization's inability to understand Yemen's complex social structure and tribal dynamics negatively affected its field dominance. In the challenging mountainous geography, shortcomings in logistical planning were also clearly evident. The sustainability of supply lines became a serious problem, especially during prolonged operations, which severely limited the operational capabilities of the troops. One of the Saudi army's greatest weaknesses is the lack of coordination between different elements of its forces. The underdeveloped joint operational capability between ground, air, and special forces has created problems, especially in the coordination of air support and ground operations. This incoherence has hindered the implementation of an effective strategy on the ground. Finally, Saudi Arabia's established military doctrine has largely focused on conventional threats. However, it lacks the tactical flexibility to adapt to the low-intensity and guerrilla warfare-based conflicts faced in Yemen. All these factors have contributed to the Saudi military's inability to be effective in Yemen despite modern weapons technology, limiting the success of military operations. The failures of Saudi Arabia's operations in Yemen have been characterized not only by the inadequacy of technological systems, but also by operational shortcomings. The fighting along the Jizan border in 2019 provides a striking example. Despite state-of-the-art surveillance systems and early warning mechanisms, Saudi troops failed to develop an effective defense against sudden guerrilla attacks by the Houthis. In 2020 to 2022, the Houthis disabled modern M1A2 Abrams tanks with improvised explosive devices and anti-tank missiles, further highlighting the Saudi army's logistical and field tactical shortcomings. The destruction of Bradley armored vehicles in the Najran and Jizan regions by simple ambushes exposed the lack of coordination within the army. In particular, the use of low-cost drones during the Abha airport attack in 2019 demonstrated the ineffectiveness of Saudi Arabia's Patriot missile defense systems. These failures were seen not only on the ground, but also in combined force operations, such as the Hodeidah port operations. The timing and communication problems between air support and ground operations clearly demonstrated the Saudi military's lack of joint operational capability. Yemen's rugged geography has been one of the most challenging factors testing the effectiveness of Saudi Arabia's modern weapons technologies. This region, full of mountain ranges exceeding 3,000 meters, deep valleys, and steep cliffs, has severely limited the mobility of heavy mechanized units and rendered sophisticated weapons systems ineffective. The clashes in the Sada region are a clear example of this. Abrams tanks have lost their maneuverability in narrow passages, making them easy targets for the Houthis. The geographical structure of Yemen has not only provided a defensive advantage, but has also disrupted the Saudi army's supply lines and made logistics operations difficult. Advanced sensor systems, thermal and optical devices have performed below their effective range due to rock formations and deep valleys, creating major challenges in target acquisition and attack planning. Sophisticated aircraft such as Apache helicopters and F-15 fighter jets have been limited in terms of maneuverability in Yemen's narrow valleys. Efforts to acquire targets and provide effective air support have been insufficient in the face of the Houthis' mastery of natural defensive positions. In a complex and challenging battlefield like Yemen, it has once again been understood that the basis for success is not technology, but the use of tactics and equipment appropriate to terrain conditions. Iran's ballistic missile and UAV support to the Houthis has been one of the most critical elements that has tipped the balance of power against Saudi Arabia in the Yemen war. This technology has not only given the Houthis a strategic advantage, but has also fundamentally shaken Saudi Arabia's war strategies and security policies. The Houthis have reached the capacity to launch attacks on major cities in Saudi Arabia, especially the capital Riyadh. These attacks have dealt a heavy blow to the Saudi economy and destabilized global energy markets, particularly by targeting energy infrastructure. While defense systems such as Patriot missiles used to prevent each Houthi attack require millions of dollars in expenditure, the ballistic missiles and UAVs used by the Houthis have been produced and deployed at much lower costs. This has meant a war of economic attrition for Saudi Arabia. The increased defense spending has seriously affected Saudi Arabia's domestic economic reform programs. Resources that should have been directed to projects such as the Vision 2030 initiative, led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, have been disrupted by the financial burden of the war. Furthermore, international criticism over the sustainability of the war has damaged Saudi Arabia's global reputation. Saudi Arabia presented the Houthis' attacks as an extension of Iran's aggressive policies in the region, and this discourse directed the West's attention to Iran rather than the Yemen war. While the US increased its sanctions against Iran, Western countries began to follow Iran's role in proxy wars more closely. However, this international pressure was not enough for Saudi Arabia to achieve its goals in Yemen. The support Iran provided to the Houthis led Saudi Arabia to seek a diplomatic solution. The Saudi-Iran rapprochement brokered by China in 2023 was seen as an important step towards reducing this tension. This agreement affected not only the Yemen war, but also the dynamics of other proxy wars in the region. However, this war has not only been a military stalemate, but also the beginning of an economic and political reassessment process for Saudi Arabia. The cost of the conflict in Yemen has drained resources that should have been allocated to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 goals and has caused the Riyadh administration to base its regional policies on a more realistic basis. The Yemen war has been a turning point in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy and has paved the way for the reshaping of the balance of power in the Middle East.